Hi everyone, my name is Hannah Mercer. I'm 34 years old. At Thanksgiving dinner, I watched my sister slip something into my drink, while my mother kept staring at my glass instead of my face. So when everyone stood for the family toast, I switched our cups, sat back down, and 8 minutes later my mother gripped the table, looked straight at my sister, and whispered her name like she had just realized the wrong daughter had stopped obeying. The first thing I noticed was not my sister's hand. It was my mother's eyes. The whole family had gathered around my parents' dining room the way we always did. Too much food, too many opinions, and one long polished table pretending everybody there loved each other in the same language. Turkey in the center. Sweet potatoes, green beans, cranberry sauce nobody ate except my Uncle Rick. My father at the head of the table already pouring wine like the holiday was something he had personally invented. My younger sister, Naomi, was seated across from me in a cream sweater that made her look softer than she was. My mother had placed her there on purpose. She always placed Naomi where she could be seen best. That had been the arrangement my whole life. Naomi got noticed. I got used. She was the daughter people described as magnetic, spirited, complicated. I was dependable, practical, strong. In my family, those words did not mean admiration. They meant I could be handed the extra weight without anyone feeling guilty. So when I saw my mother keep glancing at my water glass instead of listening to Uncle Rick's terrible story about traffic, I felt it before I understood it. A disturbance in the room. A waiting. Then Naomi reached for the breadbasket with one hand and, with the other, tipped a tiny folded packet into my drink so quickly that if I had blinked, I might have missed it. White powder. Fine. Fast. Gone, in 1 second. I did not react. That part mattered. Because families like mine survive by reading the first expression on your face and then organizing the rest of the evening around it. Shock becomes drama. Anger becomes instability. Questions become disrespect. So I kept my face blank and reached for my napkin. Naomi did not look at me after she did it. She looked at our mother. And my mother, seeing the packet disappear, looked relieved. Relieved. That was when the whole thing snapped into focus. Not a prank. Not a misunderstanding. Not Naomi improvising some monstrous little joke on her own. This had shape. Planning. Permission. Across the table, my father stood and lifted his wineglass. "All right," he said. "Family toast." Everybody pushed their chairs back at once. My aunt smiled too brightly. My cousin Daniel put his phone face down. My mother rose with her hand still resting near the serving bowl and those same nervous eyes flicking to my drink. My drink? Not me. My sister smiled at the tablecloth. And I understood exactly what the room expected from the next 10 minutes. Me dizzy. Me slurring. Me humiliated. Me being told I'd had too much, was overtired, was emotional, was embarrassing everyone on Thanksgiving. I had lived long enough inside that family to know the choreography. So while chairs scraped and my father started in on some sentimental nonsense about gratitude and blood and how blessed we all were to still be together, I picked up my glass, took 1/2 step left as if reaching for the butter dish, and switched it with my mother's. Nobody saw it, except Naomi. That was the beautiful part. Her eyes met mine for 1 second, and I watched the blood leave her face in real time. Not because she thought I would expose her, because she realized I understood. Then I sat back down. My father finished the toast. Everyone drank, including my mother. I didn't touch my glass. Dinner moved on. That was the strangest part, maybe. The ordinary noises after something evil has already happened. Forks on plates. My father carving turkey. My aunt asking for more gravy. My nephew whining about peas. The whole table continuing as if the room had not just revealed its actual operating system. I counted in my head. Not dramatically. Just calmly. 1 minute. 3. 5. At 6 minutes, my mother stopped talking in the middle of a sentence. At 7, she pressed her fingertips to the edge of the table like the wood had shifted underneath her. At 8, her fork slipped from her hand and hit the plate hard enough that everybody looked up. My father frowned. "Sharon?" She didn't answer him. She was staring straight across the table at Naomi now. Not confused. Not sick in some vague way. Recognizing. Like the body had gotten there before the lie could. Naomi went white. "Mom?" My mother gripped the tablecloth in both fists. Then, in a voice so low I only heard it because the whole room had gone silent around her, she whispered, "Naomi." My father stood. "What's wrong with her?" Nobody answered. Not at first. Because for one perfect, terrifying second, every person at that table was trapped inside the same truth and didn't know yet who was going to speak first. Naomi looked at me. Not pleading. Warning. I smiled at her. Small. Controlled. Not my father. Not my aunt. Not my cousin. Not Naomi, who kept staring at my mother's hand and then back at me like she still thought the evening might somehow rearrange itself into a version where she wasn't standing in the middle of it. I asked again, "What did you put in my drink?" My father turned toward me so sharply his chair nearly tipped. "What are you talking about?" I looked at him. "Ask your other daughter." Naomi shook her head immediately. "I didn't. It was just—" My uncle stopped in the middle of giving the address to dispatch and looked up. The whole table did. Because there are phrases that collapse a family faster than shouting ever could. It was just... My mother tried to speak, but the words dragged. "Naomi, what?" Naomi stood so fast her knee hit the table. "Mom, I thought she was going to drink it." There it was. No more misunderstanding. No more confusion. Just the truth standing up in the dining room in front of the turkey platter, and all the side dishes like it had been invited to. My father stared at her. "What did you do?" She started crying harder. "It was half a tablet." Mom said it would just calm her down. Every person at that table went still. Not because Naomi had confessed. Because she hadn't confessed alone. I turned slowly toward my mother. Her eyes, heavy now, found mine for one awful second, and I saw it plain as daylight. She knew. Maybe she hadn't imagined drinking it herself. Maybe she had told herself it was harmless. Maybe she thought a sedated daughter was still better than a disobedient one. But she knew. My uncle ended the 911 call and said, "Tell them what pill." Naomi looked at my mother like a child waiting for rescue. My father barked, "Tell him." Naomi whispered the name. Lorazepam. My aunt covered her mouth. My cousin Daniel actually stepped back from the table. And I just stood there with both hands at my sides, feeling strangely calm, because once evil says its own name, there isn't much left to wonder about. My father looked at my mother with a kind of naked disbelief I had never seen on his face before. "Sharon?" Mom's fingers slipped against the table edge. "She was going to make a scene," she murmured. That sentence hit me harder than the drugging. Not because it shocked me. Because it was so familiar. My whole life, whenever I had something important to say that didn't flatter the family structure, my mother called it a scene before I ever opened my mouth. When I told them I didn't want to work for Dad's store after college, it was a scene. When I refused to lend Naomi money after she wrecked her second car, it was a scene. When I asked why I was the one expected to pick Mom up from every appointment while Naomi had too much going on, it was a scene. And tonight? Tonight, I had planned to tell them I was leaving. Not leaving dinner. Leaving the city. 2 weeks earlier, I had accepted a marketing role in North Carolina. Better pay. Better life. And more than that, a clean chance to stop being the daughter who lived 15 minutes away and therefore got handed every crisis by default. I was going with Ben, my boyfriend of 2 years, the man my mother kept calling a phase, because he was the first person I had ever loved who made me less available to her. I had told my mother privately because I was stupid enough to think honesty might buy respect. Instead, it bought strategy. Naomi blurted it before I had to. She was going to ruin Thanksgiving with her announcement. My aunt said, "What announcement?" No one answered her. My father looked from Naomi to me to my mother, and I watched him realize, piece by piece, that the evening he thought he was hosting had already been quietly arranged without him too. The ambulance arrived fast after that. Lights through the front windows. Boots on the porch. Questions in quick, clean voices. My mother was still awake, but slower now, embarrassed and angry in that horrible mix people get when the body has betrayed the lie before they were ready. One of the paramedics asked what she had taken. I answered before Naomi could start crying again. "Lorazepam," I said. "Intended for me." The paramedic looked up sharply. "Intended for you?" My father opened his mouth. I beat him to it. I watched my sister put it in my drink. Naomi whispered, "Hannah, please." "No. Not this time." The paramedic nodded once and wrote something down. That was the sound I heard most clearly in the room after that. Not my mother slurring, not Naomi sobbing, not my father trying to steady the story. The pen, the record. As they lifted my mother from the chair, my Uncle Rick stepped beside me and said quietly, "What exactly were they trying to stop you from saying?" I looked at the doorway to the hall, where my coat was hanging beside my purse. Inside my purse was the folded offer letter. And tucked into the side pocket, wrapped in tissue, was the ring Ben and I had picked out together 3 days earlier. I looked back at my uncle and said, "Something they thought would cost them more than drugging me." My Uncle Rick asked what they were trying to stop me from saying. I looked at the hallway where my coat was hanging, then back at the table where my mother was being checked by paramedics. My sister was crying into both hands, and my father was already trying to speak louder than the truth. "I was leaving," I said. The room didn't move. So I said it again, clearer. "I was going to tell you I'm moving to North Carolina in 3 weeks. Ben and I are engaged. I took a job in Asheville. And I'm done being the person this family builds every holiday, emergency, and quiet little collapse on." Even the paramedic looked up. Because there it was. The real reason. Not Thanksgiving. Not a scene. An exit. My mother made a broken little sound from the chair. The lorazepam had slowed her, not softened her. She still looked furious in patches, like rage was trying to push through the fog. Naomi whispered, "Mom said you'd ruin dinner." I turned toward her so fast she stopped crying for half a second. "No," I said. "What your mother meant was I was going to ruin the arrangement." My father stepped in immediately. Enough. That was his whole parenting philosophy, really. Not truth. Not protection. Just enough whenever reality started getting expensive. One of the paramedics asked, "Whose medication was it?" No one answered. So I did. "My mother keeps lorazepam in her purse." Sharon tried to shake her head. "It was just a half." A half? There are phrases that sound almost normal until you remember. They were said by a woman who helped drug her own daughter because she was afraid of hearing a life announcement she couldn't control. Uncle Rick looked at my father and said, "Tom, are you hearing this?" Dad's face had gone that strange color men get when humiliation and anger are fighting under the skin. "You're all blowing this out of proportion." "No," I said. "You just don't like the proportion." That landed harder than I expected. My Aunt Denise, who had been quiet most of the night in the way women get quiet when they know exactly what family they married into, finally spoke. "She said she was moving?" Denise asked. I nodded. "With Ben?" "Yes. And your mother knew?" I looked at Sharon. She looked away. That was answer enough. Because I had told her 3 nights earlier. In her kitchen. Quietly. Privately. I had even tried to be kind about it, which still annoys me when I think about it. I told her Ben had accepted a role in Asheville, that I had one too, that we'd found a small rental with a porch, that I wanted to tell Dad and Naomi over Thanksgiving because I didn't want them hearing it secondhand. She had gone still then, too. Not angry. Calculating. Then she said, "You can't leave right now." Not congratulations. Not, "Are you happy?" Just you can't. When I asked why, she started listing things I was apparently carrying without ever agreeing to them. Dad's blood pressure appointments. Christmas dinner. Naomi's school pickups, when she's overwhelmed. Watching my nephew while Naomi went to physical therapy. Sorting Grandma's old things before New Year's. Everything. All the invisible hooks that had kept me close enough to be useful and guilty enough not to notice. I told her, no. She cried. I left. And apparently, instead of adjusting to my answer like an adult, she made a plan with Naomi. The younger paramedic asked if I wanted to ride to the hospital. No, I said. My father snapped his head toward me. She's your mother. I looked at him. And I was her daughter. That shut him up. It also told the room more than I meant it to, because once the sentence was out, everybody there understood the shape of it. Whatever my mother had feared about me leaving, it had mattered more to her than my safety, my trust, or even the basic line, "Decent people don't cross with food and drink." Then Uncle Rick did something I did not expect. He pointed at Naomi and said, "Did you do this before?" Naomi's face changed. That tiny, guilty flicker. My stomach dropped. Not because I had proof, because I had memory. The soft, floaty exhaustion after my cousin Tara's bridal shower, when I barely remembered the drive home. The Christmas Eve 3 years earlier when I cried in the bathroom for no reason, and my mother told people I was just exhausted. The weird calm after family dinners where I had planned to push back on something and somehow never found the energy. I stared at Naomi. "Did you?" she whispered. "Not like this." That was enough. The whole room recoiled without moving. My father said her name like a warning. Denise covered her mouth. Daniel, my cousin, actually swore under his breath. And I just stood there thinking about all the times I had blamed myself for disappearing inside my own life, right before I needed to defend it. The paramedic wrote something down. Then he looked at me and said, gently, "Ma'am, because this involved a medication given without consent, law enforcement may need a statement." My father stepped forward immediately. "That won't be necessary." The paramedic didn't even look at him. He looked at me. Not because I was the easiest person in the room. Because I was the only one whose answer mattered. And for the first time all night, I understood something almost as clearly as the drug in the water glass. This was not going to end with my mother sleeping it off, and the family calling it an unfortunate holiday misunderstanding. This was going to follow them into the light. The paramedic asked whether I wanted to make a statement. My father answered before I could. No. That almost made me laugh. Not because it was funny. Because even now, with my mother half sedated in a dining chair, and my sister crying through a confession she hadn't meant to make in front of the turkey, he still thought the room belonged to him. I looked at the paramedic and said, "Yes." My father turned on me instantly. "Hannah." "No," I said, "you don't get to override this one too." That shut him up for exactly 2 seconds. Then he tried again, lower now, the voice he used when he wanted threat to sound like reason. "You are not calling the police on your own mother over a misunderstanding." I stared at him. "A misunderstanding is forgetting gravy. This is drugging." The paramedic didn't look at either of us. He just nodded once, like he had heard enough families in expensive kitchens use the wrong nouns for ugly things. My Uncle Rick stepped closer to me then. Not touching. Just near enough to make it clear I was no longer alone in the room. "Do what you need to do," he said quietly. That almost got me more than the confession had. Because for my whole life, every family room had been designed to fold me back into obedience. This was the first one in memory where someone beside me was not trying to shrink the truth before it made trouble. The police officer arrived 10 minutes later. Female. Mid-40s. Hair pulled back. Calm face. The kind of presence that doesn't have to be loud because it already knows what it is. She asked for names first. Then, what had been consumed. Then, who saw what? I told her everything. Not beautifully. Not with some perfect courtroom rhythm. Just plainly. Naomi lifted the packet. Dropped it in my drink. My mother watched my glass. I switched cups. 8 minutes later, my mother was affected. The officer wrote the whole thing down. Then she asked Naomi, "Did you put medication in your sister's drink?" Naomi looked at my mother. That was answer enough even before she spoke. "Yes," she whispered. "Why?" Naomi started crying again. "Mom said it would just slow her down." There it was. Not calm her. Not help her. Slow her down. Because what my mother feared was never my emotions. It was timing. The possibility that I might get the truth out before dessert and make the room rearrange around me instead of around her. The officer turned to my mother, who was still groggy and furious at the same time. "Mrs. Mercer opened her eyes and said the sentence that finished her. She was going to ruin Thanksgiving. The officer's pen stopped for 1 second. Then started again. My father ran one hand over his face. "Sharon, stop talking." But of course she wouldn't. Women like my mother spend years believing their motives count as mitigation. If they meant to preserve something, then whatever they did to preserve it starts sounding almost noble to them. "I only wanted one quiet dinner," she slurred. I looked at her and felt something inside me finally stop pleading. One quiet dinner. At the cost of my body, my consent, my voice. Again. Because Naomi's "not like this" was still sitting in the room between us all. Not like this. Meaning there had been other times. Maybe smaller. Maybe less clumsy. Maybe just enough to turn me hazy before a fight, tired before a boundary, too floaty to finish a sentence that would have cost them something. The officer heard it too. She looked at Naomi and said, "What did you mean earlier when you said, 'not like this'?" My sister froze. That was the first honest reaction she'd had all night. Not crying. Not outrage. Fear. My father stepped in. "We're done here." The officer looked at him. "No, sir." "You're not." Then the paramedics asked for my mother's insurance card before transporting her for evaluation, and Aunt Denise, God bless that woman, reached for Sharon's purse because nobody else was moving fast enough. She unzipped it, dug past lipstick and tissues and a packet of mints, then suddenly stopped. "What is this?" Everyone looked. In her hand was a small silver tin. Inside were 3 more folded white packets. The whole room went silent. Not scandalized. Rearranged. Because one packet could still be turned into panic, bad judgment, a terrible mistake. 4 packets meant planning. A system. My aunt looked at my mother like she had never seen her clearly before. Then she looked at me. "Hannah," she said, and her voice shook. "There are more." My aunt held the silver tin in both hands like it might explain itself if she stared hard enough. It didn't. 3 more folded packets sat inside, neat and ready. Not desperation. Not impulse. Preparation. The officer looked at my mother first. "Mrs. Mercer, what's in those?" My mother tried to sit straighter in the chair, still foggy but fighting to hold on to authority. "That's prescription medication." The officer's voice stayed level. "Why is it portioned into separate packets?" No answer. My father finally looked scared. Not embarrassed. Not angry. Scared. Because up until that second, this had still been a bad Thanksgiving in his mind. A terrible scene. A family matter sliding out of hand. But 3 extra packets in a silver tin turned the whole thing into something harder to narrate away. My aunt handed the tin to the officer. Naomi started crying again. Mom said it was only for emergencies. I looked at her. What kind of emergency requires folding sedatives into paper? She couldn't answer. Of course she couldn't. Because the answer had always been me. My opinions. My timing. My announcements. My refusals. My tendency to say the true thing at the wrong moment for people who depended on quiet daughters and easy evenings. The officer asked if I wanted to come to the station the next day to give a fuller statement. I said yes. She asked if I felt safe staying in the house that night. That question hit me harder than it should have. Because the answer was no. Not after the packets. Not after Naomi's "not like this." Not after seeing my mother's real fear wasn't that she hurt me, it was that she had failed to stop me in time. My Uncle Rick said, "She's staying with me." My father opened his mouth. Rick turned to him and said, "Don't." That one word did what 20 years of family politeness never had. It put my father back in his chair without argument. The paramedics took my mother to the hospital to be monitored. Naomi went with her, white-faced and shaking. My aunt, the right to arrive at my own life without being managed into it. I still moved to Asheville. Of course I did. Ben came down the following weekend with boxes, and that quiet look he gets when he's trying not to let rage turn into something performative. I told him everything: the packet, the switched glasses, the officer, the extra tin, Naomi's slip, my mother's sentence about one quiet dinner. He listened all the way through. Then he said, "You were never the problem in that house. You were the interruption." I still think about that line. Because it was true. My whole life, I had mistaken myself for the unstable part of the room whenever I resisted the role they assigned me. But I wasn't instability. I was the interruption. The person whose existence made their preferred story harder to maintain. The fallout was ugly. My mother sent 6 voicemails from the hospital talking about stress, humiliation, and how I had turned one terrible decision into a public spectacle. Not once did she say "I'm sorry" in a way that meant anything. My father emailed me twice. The first time to say families survive by keeping hard moments private. The second time to ask whether I was really going to throw away Thanksgiving over misjudged medication. Misjudged medication. That phrase told me he was gone too. Not dead. Just gone in the way fathers go when they decide preserving the structure matters more than preserving the daughter inside it. Naomi wrote one message worth keeping. It said, "I need you to know this wasn't the first time Mom asked me to do something to make you easier, but it was the first time I saw it clearly." I read that line 10 times. Then I put the phone down and sat with the knowledge that half my adulthood might have been lived under chemical fog, whenever timing mattered too much to my mother. That part, I still don't know how to forgive. And maybe I never will. Ben and I got married the next spring. Small ceremony. Mountain light. 23 people. No assigned family performance. No one monitoring my glass. No one watching the room more than my face. Rick walked me down the aisle. Denise cried before I did. And when the officiant asked whether anyone objected, the silence that followed felt like the first truly peaceful silence of my life. I don't speak to my mother now. I speak to Naomi carefully. Very carefully. Not because I trust her fully, because I watched the exact moment she realized obedience had made her dangerous, and I believe some people can change after the horror of seeing themselves clearly. But distance is still the language I trust most. My father and I exchange almost nothing. Holiday cards. Once-a-year check-ins. Weather without intimacy. That's enough. Sometimes people ask whether I regret switching the glasses. No. I regret the years before it. The years I spent trying to preserve women who would rather sedate me than hear I was leaving. The years I mistook family peace for safety. The years I thought being loved meant being easy to arrange. But that night? No. That night, I finally let the right person feel the room they had created. If you made it this far, tell me in the comments. Would you have switched the glasses too, or would you have called her out the second you saw the packet? And after finding extra packets in your mother's purse, would you ever sit at that family table again? Don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next one. Thank you for being here, and I'll see you in the next video.